Okay, it's that time of the year again, where we get the first copy or copies of a new book. And this is obviously a very special moment for an author. And I'd like to share this moment with you. That's my hat, which you'll have seen in various episodes of Ancient Aliens and whatever else. We'll come back to that at the end. But this box here was received yesterday from Simon & Schuster, who are the distributors of Inner Traditions. And my new book is called The First Female Pharaoh, Sobekneferu, Goddess of the Seven Stars. And we'll come on to what that's about in a minute. But I'm going to assume that this box does contain copies of it. I mean, if it isn't, you won't be seeing this video anyway. So let's assume that this is the case, and the fact you're watching it is the fact that I am looking at my new book. So without further ado, let's have a look, shall we? So, I mean, this is, you know, the best moment of writing a book is the moment that you first put your hands on it. You know, it's not when you finish writing it or anything like that, but it's just, you know, looking at it and just thinking about the achievement, essentially. So let's have a look. That we've got, take away the packing. And yep, I think this is it. All right, here we go. There you go, the first female pharaoh, Sobekneferu, Goddess of the Seven Stars. Okay, by me, and obviously there's that, and I'll try and explain all of this as we go along. Let's just put this box away now. So, who is Sobekneferu? Well, she was a Egyptian female ruler, clearly female, the first woman ever to officially wear the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, which is something that she achieved around 1800 BC. At the end of a very successful age known as the Middle Kingdom, which had a series of kings that culminated with her father, who was Amenemhet III. And then his son, Amenemhet IV, took the throne for about a decade. And then after he disappears, she takes the throne for 4 years. And after this, Egypt is plunged into a dark age known as the Second Intermediate Period, where these Asian warlords coming in from probably somewhere like Syria or northern Palestine took over northern Egypt and essentially controlled large parts of the kingdom. At the same time, there was a much smaller Egyptian dynasty, or a series of them actually, who set up in the southern part of the country at Thebes, which is modern day Luxor. And she basically was able to reverse a lot of decisions that her brother had made. Now, the relationship between her and her brother seems to have been very, very close to start with, to the point that 2 pyramids were made at the same time at a place called Mesguna, which is just to the south of Dashur, if you've been to the pyramids there. And these 2 pyramids almost certainly were for her and for her brother. But the one for her brother would seem to have been used, although whether it was used by him, we don't know. But the one that was reserved for her, which is Mesguna North, seems to have never been used. So her body never reached her pyramid, or certainly the one that's assumed to be associated with her, which I think absolutely it was. But as I said, the country was plunged into this dark age, but what she managed to do was to keep alive the flame of nationalism within Egypt at a time when the place was just being overrun and would have basically become almost another just a vassal state for Canaan if she had not done what she did and kept the country alive for those vital 4 years. And so the book obviously talks all about this. It talks about her monuments. It talks about every inscription relating to her. It talks about her relationship with her brother, with her sister, whose name was Nefertar. And by the way, you will often see Sobekneferu's name written the other way around. In other words, Neferu Sobek. In fact, this is quite a modern trend among Egyptologists. But in all honesty, it can be written either way around. It really doesn't matter. There are different variations of her name that show it either as Sobekneferu or Neferu Sobek. So, you know, the choice of name is merely on the actual, you know, individual writer or author. But so how did she get to becoming Pharaoh? Well, I'm afraid that I'm going to say that she was probably pretty ruthless, and that for a woman who, to start with, probably began her life as a priestess, a temple priestess, probably connected with the Temple of Hathor, although I can't absolutely confirm that. But somehow she rose, you know, from a status where there was no chance of her ever becoming Pharaoh of Egypt to achieving this. I think she had to be pretty ruthless and an incredibly strong-minded person. And this she eventually achieved. And as I said, I think without her, Egypt would have collapsed. And if Egypt had collapsed, we wouldn't have had the new kingdom with all the incredible kings and queens there. And the chances are the world would actually probably be a different place, not just Egypt, not just the Middle East, but the world would be completely different. You know, you wouldn't have had Tutankhamun, you wouldn't have had Ramesses, you wouldn't have had Tutmosis, you wouldn't have had Akhenaten and Nefertiti. You know, the whole thing would have collapsed. Yeah, all right. You know, what type of alternative history we'd have had, we don't know, obviously. But the other important thing is that Sobekneferu was a inspiration for later female pharaohs, particularly Hatshepsut. She would seem to have styled her entire reign after Sobekneferu, and there are so many links between the two of them that are brought out, not only in life, in the way that she wanted to mimic Sobekneferu, but also in death, the way that she wanted to link with Sobekneferu's family. I bring this out in the book. This is an incredible story that has never really been put together before. But clearly, Sobekneferu, some of you are saying, well, who the hell is she? I've never even heard of her. Well, that's because there is evidence that following the Second Intermediate period and the commencement of the New Kingdom, which begins with the 18th dynasty, the very important 18th dynasty, there was some suppression of Sobekneferu's reign. She's mentioned in some king lists, but not others, which is very curious, almost to the point that she's ignored because of her connection with the fact that Egypt nearly fell during the Second Intermediate period. But it would seem as if her memory was preserved under another name. Now, some of you will know about a legendary female king of Egypt by the name of Nitocris. Now, never really before has Nitocris been linked with Sobekneferu, but I can show, and I spend good time in the book, proving that Nitocris is one and the same as Sobekneferu. I mean, Nitocris comes from the works of Herodotus, who was basically the father of history, a Greek who lived in and wrote in the 5th century BC. And he talks about Nitocris. And she's much later mentioned by Manetho, who creates the list, the chronology of the kings of Egypt. And he places her in the 6th dynasty. But this is completely wrong and has been shown to be completely wrong by Kim Reichholt, who is a very studious Egyptologist who's examined very carefully Nitocris and can show that she did not exist in the 6th dynasty. What I show is that she actually existed in the Middle Kingdom, and that there's plenty of evidence of this in the context of the way that Herodotus talks about her. So, you know, that's something. So in other words, Nitocris is Sobekneferu, and therefore what Herodotus tells us about Nitocris is incredibly important about her relationship to her brother, who was the king before she took over the rule, and everything about it starts to make sense. But here's the thing. Herodotus tells us that Nitocris ended her own life. She committed suicide. And I think that's exactly what happened to Sobekneferu. And I show why I believe that, what was going on in the country that would have made her commit suicide. And when we're talking about suicide, we're talking about a ritual death. In other words, instead of her being killed by some natural process or being murdered, she decided to step into the next world herself, exactly in the same way as Cleopatra. You know, many hundreds, not thousands of years later, Cleopatra went out of this world in exactly the same way. And I think that there's absolute close parallels between the story of Cleopatra and Sobekneferu. The other interesting thing is that the Bible speaks about this same period of time, generally under the story of Joseph. You know, he of the technicolored coat. You know, he was basically there in Egypt at the time of Sobekneferu's father, who was Amenemhet III. And what we find is that there is a large number, or a body of literature, particularly from the Arab period, that talks about Joseph in Egypt and expands upon it. And it's very clear that the kings that are being referred to within these accounts are Amenemhet III and Amenemhet IV, you know, in other words, the son. And there is references to the daughter of the Pharaoh, and how Joseph builds this huge, great palace for her in the Fayum, and the rest of it. And I am certain that this is Sobekneferu. She's not mentioned as a monarch, but she's mentioned as the daughter of Pharaoh. And everything that's said about her seems to quite clearly show that this is Sobekneferu. So that's another thing. So there's a whole biblical element of this. I also showed that in her early years, Sobekneferu was almost certainly brought up in the Delta, the Nile Delta, in the exact same area where Joseph and his family and the Hebrews, the Semitic peoples also were. So I think that this also influenced her in her early life and brought her into contact with this goddess Hathor. And particularly, I think, her more Semitic form under the name of Balat, which means the lady, and the cult associated with her. So, you know, this is another whole area that's being brought out for the first time. And as I said, her memory was suppressed. In fact, come the 18th dynasty in New Kingdom times, nobody even knew where Sobekneferu had been buried, so much so that they were just going to random tombs, essentially, from her period and venerating her there. So it's very clear that where she was buried was forgotten very, very quickly. So that's an important point to remember. I mean, clearly in the past there would have been a lot more evidence of her, but you know, with the things like the burning of the Library of Alexandria, we lost so much, literature, that probably a lot of references to Sobekneferu would have been lost. But she would have been known about, you know, by people like Cleopatra, Nefertiti, and clearly by Hatshepsut, all of which I think were inspired by this first female pharaoh. So not much was known about her until the 19th century, in the early years of Egyptology. And here you start getting writers, particularly a gentleman, a German, I think he's, I can't remember, I think French, Belgium, Egyptologist by the name of Heinrich Bruch. He publishes a book that talks extensively about the legacy of Sobekneferu, how she influenced the kings that came in the next dynasty, which is the 13th, which was this nationalistic dynasty that started at the beginning of the Dark Age, the Second Intermediate Period, and they carried the torch of nationalism through to the next dynasty that they passed the baton onto, which was the 17th dynasty. Forget the other ones, they're explained in the book. But the 17th dynasty were very important, and they were the ones that eventually rose up against these Asian warlords known as the Hyksos, and won back Egypt for the Egyptians, basically, and allowed the new kingdom to take place. So Henry Bruch wrote extensively about her. And what he wrote was picked up extensively by a more speculative historian by the name of Gerald Massey. And he expanded on this and saw her as almost the personification of a woman who was resurrecting a very ancient religion that was associated not just with the crocodile god Sobek, who you can see on the front of the cover here. That's Sobek there, okay? But in addition to this, the mother of Sobek, this great mother who takes the form of a hippopotamus and whose name is Neith, very, very ancient goddess. And Neith and Sobek are together as a sky figure in the sky that is made up of the stars of Draco, but also Ursa Minor, and to a degree Ursa Major. And you see 7 stars on images of this sky figure, and I think that they represent the 7 stars of Ursa Major. But it was all about the control of the heavens, because it was connected with the turning point of the heavens. This was the sky figure that controlled the passage of time. And what Gerald Massey said was that Nefertiti revived this whole cult and focused it around the other religions of Egypt, and in fact virtually tried to create almost like a monotheistic religion. Well, I think that's exactly what she did, using as her base this massive complex that she and her father created, which has come down to us under the name of the Egyptian labyrinth in the Fayum. What I show is that during her reign is that all priests from all different noms or districts of Egypt had to come to the Fayum to venerate their local god under the name of Sobek. In other words, the soul or the spirit of their god was Sobek, and that they would have to come and make offerings every year. There's a lot of evidence of this, not just from the archaeological discoveries that have been made at the labyrinth, but also from much later classical writers that talk about the function of this place called the labyrinth, which today is just ruins, but you can still visit it. So Gerald Massey took this on and made her out to be almost like this sort of genealogist of this cult that he believed continued on, was very ancient, but that continued on in one form or another throughout Egyptian history. But what's interesting is it would seem that other people were beginning to take an interest in her, including the Irish writer of Dracula, Bram Stoker. Now, he was an important person in the late Victorian times within the theatre. He worked at the Lyceum Theatre in London, and he came into contact with a large number of occultists. And these occultists were mostly in something called the Order of the Golden Dawn. And so he mixed with them at the Lyceum and in other clubs and whatever. And he heard about one of their members, a lady by the name of Florence Farr, an actress, who was channeling this Egyptian female guide. Now, it wasn't Sobekneferu, it was somebody else, but that a lot of the members of the Golden Dawn were really upset about this, that this this guide was beginning to take over and command what they did, and it was being seen as evil and whatever, and they wanted Florence Farr to stop this. She even formed her own group to actually do meditations and occult rituals and stuff like that surrounding this Egyptian contact, as it was, and it was called the Sphere Group. I know my colleague Graham Phillips is researching this as well, and Bram Stoker, I think, got to hear of this, and he created a novel that is known or published under the name The Jewel of Seven Stars. Seven stars related to this great mother goddess of time, this hippopotamus in association with Sobek, although obviously he saw it in a much more fictional basis. He saw it as associated with the goddess Hathor, which definitely is a valid link. And so he created this book, and he made Sobekneferu into the antagonist of the book, this Egyptian queen that ruled Upper and Lower Egypt, who he called Queen Tera, Tera. And his book, when it was published in, I think it was 1903, was so controversial that his publishers said, look, please change the ending of it for all future editions, because this is just too shocking for the post-Victorian market. I mean, I won't go into what happens, but I mean, one of the things is that the daughter of the archaeologist that finds the tomb of Queen Tera becomes possessed and is taken over by this Egyptian female queen, exactly like Florence Farr was within her rites and rituals to do with the Egyptian contact. And I think that Bram Stoker used all this to create his story. And of course, what's the legacy of that? Various films in which this Egyptian female queen, sometimes a princess, comes back to life and creates havoc in the modern world, generally in London. The best film of that genre, in my opinion, is The Awakening from 1980, featuring Charlton Heston. Brilliant film if you've not seen it. But also, more recently, The Mummy in 2017, starring Tom Cruise. The Egyptian female antagonist in that is unquestionably based on Bram Stoker's Queen Tera from The Jewel of Seven Stars. So, we know of Sobekneferu, but under other names and by other means as well. So, in addition to this, occultists were also beginning to take a lot of interest in Sobekneferu in the 20th century, including one by the name of Kenneth Grant. He wrote a series of 3 trilogies of books linking the ancient primeval religions to do with a sort of a left-hand path, quite dark, but to do with Egypt and whatever, and saw Sobekneferu, I say re because some of the terms, some of the way that her name's spelled adds re, which is ra at the end of it, and that he started writing all about her in his books and saw her as almost like the creator and the revivalist, just like Gerald Massey, of this cult that has survived through time. And these ideas were also picked up by a genealogist, an historical writer who was involved in various sort of occult and chivalric orders by the name of Nicholas de Vere. And he basically, he's now passed away, but he saw Sobekneferu as the founder, the genealogist of almost like a Grail dynasty, the Dragon Kings, as he called it. I mean, I mentioned some of this stuff in the last chapter of the book. I mean, not in any detail, but it's very interesting the way that Sobekneferu has been seen and has come down to us through the different routes. And it's clear that she's, you know, becoming awake. She is awakening, quite literally. She's coming alive again. Her memory is there. And of course, obviously, I've now done the first ever biography of her. And, you know, clearly I'd recommend that you read this. And yeah, I mean, I think that's probably about it. The book's obviously on sale from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or on any other online bookstall. Obviously, I'm going to be doing publicity about this. Myself, Hugh Newman, and the Megalithomania team, JJ Ainsworth, we're doing a tour of Egypt in November this year, 2023, where we'll be going to all the sites associated with Sobekneferu, amongst obviously every other site in Egypt. We'll be going on a special 4-wheel, drive out to the Fayum to see the sites associated with her, in particular this very strange megalithic temple called Casa El Saga on the north side of the Fayum, which I can show and provide good archaeological evidence that was manufactured, was made during her reign. When I say manufactured, made, what I mean by that is it was redesigned. As I think that the actual structure itself is older than her age, but the whole interior was redesigned during her reign, or that of her brother, but under her influence. Her name seems to be present there, and I show the evidence of this. And weirdly enough, even since I've written this book, I found another inscription of her, which is not in any of the books, or certainly wasn't when I read them, a place called Medinet Mardi, which is another temple associated with her brother on the south side of the Fayum. This is this huge great lake about 60 miles to the southwest of Cairo. It's a huge oasis area. Well, anyway, we're going to be going there. We'll go outside the labyrinth, go to the site of the pyramid of her father, Amenemhet III, and obviously, visit the Casa El Saga site. In fact, let me just try and show you a picture of Casa El Saga. All the pictures of it were supplied by my friend Annie Williams, who went out there. Unfortunately, I wrote all this during lockdown, so we didn't go to most of the sites. So there you go, Casa El Saga. It's this weird megalithic temple there. So yeah, we're going to go there, and obviously watch out for anything else. Now, I'm not an Egyptologist. I'm not an academic. I am a history and science writer. So obviously we're having a certain amount of not problems, but the Egyptological community are essentially ignoring this book completely. So if you can help me in any way, promote it, I would appreciate this. And I'm particularly looking out for the women who might be able to promote this from a female perspective. I mean, this is a great story for women. This was a woman who never thought that she would become pharaoh, achieving that role, the first woman ever to wear the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. I mean, that's an incredible achievement, and I think people need to know about this. So anyway, that's that. I mean, there are some great images in here of her reconstructions from my good friend Russell Hussain. Also, my colleague Nick Burton has done various illustrations as well in here. So yeah, anyway, that's that. Now, so that's the business end out the way. Right, now let's try and do something else. This hat I've worn to countries all over the world, and as you can see, it's now beginning to fall apart. And Hugh Newman, at the time of my birthday in January, did this montage of me wearing all of these different hats and which one I should be wearing next. Well, I thought about the possibility of actually wearing this for this video, and not only does it look stupid now with the hole, but it's actually stretched to such a degree that I can't. It just won't. It's just look. It's just silly. So I said at some point that I would ritually burn this. So I'm going to do it now. So don't worry, I have protection from doing that. So here we go. So we're now burning the hat, okay, and at a suitable point, I will put it in a bucket of water so that nothing too stupid is going to take place. But there we are. So I now officially need a new hat. And now I'm going to put this in the bucket of water before I burn my house down. And I think with that, I better stop this. So I shall